Hello friends, something unusual is happening in Ukraine. Many of the information sources I follow have gone silent in a coordinated manner, which is quite unusual. This kind of information blackout reminds me of what occurred before the operation in Kursk. Today, President Zelensky mentioned in the United States that the end of the war is closer than it appears. I've also noticed the emergence of messages suggesting excitement, yet they advise to keep quiet about it for now. We will stay alert to what unfolds in the coming days. Perhaps in response to this sudden media silence, a Belarusian Air Force Yak-130 aircraft entered deep into Ukrainian airspace, flying over the border between the Kyiv and Zhytomyr regions. At 14:28 Kyiv time, the Ukrainian Air Force reported on their Telegram channel about an aerial target crossing the state border from Belarus and heading south over the Kyiv and Zhytomyr regions. A minute later, at 14:29, an air raid alert was issued over the capital and warnings were also given for the northern regions. The Telegram channel Belaruski Hajuin reported that the target crossed the border around 14:25 and identified it as a Belarusian combat training aircraft, the Yak-130, which had taken off from the Gomel region. It is highly likely that this was an attempt to detect the locations of Kyiv's air defense systems and to conduct reconnaissance of the Ukrainian forces deployed in that area. I do not rule out the possibility that this indicates Russia is preparing to resume attacks and bombings from Belarus. According to Ukrainian regulations, any aviation flight is prohibited except for Ukrainian or Allied aircraft. Therefore, the Belarusian reconnaissance flight, no matter how they tried to pass it off as an out-of-course training flight, was a provocation and posed a significant risk for both the pilot and the delicate balance between the two countries. This information necessitates our careful attention, as if true, it could have a significant impact on the ongoing conflict. Some of you may have noticed that certain Russian media outlets are suggesting that India plans to sell its T-72 tanks to Russia, which would clearly be bad news for Kyiv. However, things are not that straightforward. India has indeed decided to upgrade its tank fleet, with 2,500 locally manufactured T-72 tanks under Soviet license being phased out. Of these, 1,000 units have already been retired as they were replaced by an equivalent number of T-90 tanks, also manufactured under license in India. Now, as savvy businesspeople, the Indians want to export their decommissioned T-72s. They have reached an agreement with Russia to modernize them before offering them, supposedly to countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Despite hopes from Russian film enthusiasts of switching to T-90 tank production in the year 2000, India may find multiple interested parties for these units, given that the T-72 is a vehicle used by various armies in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, indicating a broad market for countries looking to bolster their fleets with upgraded armored vehicles. Clearly, the countries most interested in acquiring these tanks are Russia and Ukraine. Russia has had to reactivate thousands of combat vehicles of various types that it is retrieving from its Soviet-era stockpiles. While reports boast of increasing T-90 production to over 100 units per month, estimates suggest that this is insufficient to compensate for their combat losses. Meanwhile, Ukraine has been repairing its fleet of 578 T-64 bullet tanks that were in storage at the start of the war, but those stocks are also dwindling. Hence, finding a new source of tanks to equip the new brigades being formed is crucial, making a batch of 1,000 upgraded T-72s an attractive option to boost their fleet. The question of what will happen with these tanks hinges on India's ambiguous position. On one hand, India has been purchasing substantial quantities of Russian oil to refine and sell the byproducts in Europe. On the other hand, it is actively acquiring new weapon systems from Western suppliers. If India decides to transfer the tanks to Russia, even through triangulation with third countries, it could jeopardize its rearmament program with advanced weapon systems from the United States and Europe. Conversely, if these tanks end up in the Ukrainian army, Russia might threaten to cut off the flow of cheap oil to Indian refineries. Honestly, even if India yields to the pressure from the United States and NATO and ultimately transfers the T-72s to Ukraine, the Russians may complain and protest but likely won't cut off oil supplies to India. They desperately need the income from those sales to sustain their war effort. So remember, the next time a Kremlin supporter tells you those tanks are heading to Russia, remind them that life brings surprises, and it's possible the Russians might see those T-72s advancing towards them in Kursk. On a more concrete and positive note, units from the main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense have completely liberated the territory of the Vovchansk Aggregates Plant in the Kharkiv region. They cleared all 30 buildings and returned control to the armed forces of Ukraine. This operation was conducted by special units of the GUR, Stugna, and Hunter RDK. At 1440, the commander of the special unit, Timur, reported to GUR Chief Kirilo Budanov about the successful conclusion of the operation. The fighters conducted a systematic sweep of the plant's buildings, engaging in direct combat with the enemy in densely constructed areas. In some instances, Ukrainian special forces faced the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. The Russians had converted the Vovchansk Aggregates Plant into a propaganda fortress, employing their most motivated and professional units, including the 45th Brigade of Airborne Troops from Kubinka. Additionally, against Ukrainian scouts, there has been a continuous use of significant amounts of artillery, kamikaze drones, guided aerial bombs, and thermobaric flamethrowers. Meanwhile, a Russian warship fired warning shots at a Norwegian fishing vessel in the Arctic Ocean earlier this month. According to the captain of the ship, the Russian destroyer Admiral Levchenko was participating in large-scale maneuvers off the Norwegian coast, a region of growing strategic importance for both Moscow and NATO. The incident reportedly occurred on September 12 when the fishing boat MS Regan Hill Christine, measuring 15 meters, was in Norway's exclusive economic zone north of Bardo in the Barents Sea. The Norwegian boat was fishing and had already been in contact with the Russian destroyer via radio. The captain stated, "They called me on the radio saying, 'This is a Russian warship, you must leave the area.' I replied that we first needed to haul in our fishing lines. Then the Russian warship approached us at full speed." The captain recounted looking over his shoulder towards starboard and seeing the warship racing towards them. When the ship was 200 meters away, they sounded the foghorn for about 15 seconds to get our attention, and then fired a cannon. We heard a loud bang, and the hull shook violently. The Admiral Levchenko is armed with two 100mm AK-1 dual-purpose guns and four 30mm K6 30-meter Gatling-type close defense guns, in addition to anti-submarine missiles, surface-to-air missiles, torpedoes, and anti-submarine rocket launchers. The Admiral Levchenko was taking part in the Okine 24 naval exercise, a large-scale operation that dates back to the Cold War and is the largest version in 30 years. According to Russian reports, the task force includes over 400 warships and 120 aircraft from Russia and China. While the Okine 24 exercises are not new, it is reported that these maneuvers are taking place closer to Norway and now involve a greater degree of live fire than in the past. It does not seem wise for Russian ships to begin firing at NATO fishing vessels in international waters, especially within their exclusive economic zone where they have every right to be. Now, an important question arises. Do you think it is in Ukraine's interest to receive tanks from India?